What if the chaos described in the second verse of Genesis was not a beginning, but an aftermath? What if the formless, void and darkened earth was not the raw material of a new creation, but the direct physical consequence of a war that did not take place on land or sea, but in the highest heavens? For centuries, we have been taught that the story of creation begins with a peaceful, orderly process. But the ancient texts whisper of a different, far more violent truth. This is the hidden truth of the first war in heaven, a cosmic civil war of unimaginable scale, and the story of how its shockwaves shattered the primordial world that existed long before Adam. The canonical Bible gives us only fleeting glimpses of this conflict in the prophecies of Isaiah and the visions of Revelation, but it remains silent on the devastating physical toll it took on the material universe. Most people read Genesis 1-2 and see poetry, but you are here because you sense the echoes of a cataclysm. You understand that a universe created in perfect order does not simply become a chaotic wasteland by accident. This journey will piece together the evidence from across the scriptures, both canonical and forbidden, to reconstruct the story of that first great war. You will understand not just that it happened, but precisely how it shattered the world that came before ours. Before we enter this cosmic battlefield, be sure you are subscribed with notifications enabled. The story of creation is not a peaceful one. It is a story of reclamation. To comprehend the sheer violence of the war that was to come, we must first attempt to grasp the profound peace of the order it destroyed. Before the first act of rebellion, the universe existed in a state of perfect, intricate harmony. Imagine not a dark and empty space, but a vibrant, multi-dimensional reality, a kingdom of kingdoms, all operating in flawless synchronicity. This was the primordial cosmic order. The highest heavens, described in ancient texts as a place of fiery stones and rivers of light, were the administrative center, the capital of this universal government. From the throne of the Creator, commands flowed outward through a complex and beautiful hierarchy of celestial beings. The scriptures give us their titles: thrones, who represented divine authority; dominions, who governed specific cosmic sectors; and powers, who maintained the very laws of spiritual and physical reality. This was not a static, silent realm. It was a bustling, dynamic civilization. Angelic princes ruled over their designated territories. Messengers traveled the celestial highways between the realms. And at the heart of it all was a constant, joyful exchange of worship, a symphony of praise where every created being contributed its unique note to the glory of the one who made them. The historical and political tapestry of this pre-war era was one of absolute stability, perfect justice, and unbroken peace. It was a kingdom operating at its peak, with no indication of the catastrophic internal conflict that was about to tear it apart from within. The spiritual atmosphere of this primordial age was a direct reflection of its perfect political order. It was an atmosphere of absolute integrity where the concept of a divided loyalty did not yet exist. The air of the heavens, if you can imagine it, vibrated with a single resonant frequency, the frequency of pure, unadulterated worship. Worship, in this context, was not an activity performed at appointed times. It was the very physics of their existence, the foundational law upon which their reality was built. The glory of the Creator was the light that illuminated every realm, and the natural, joyful response of every being was to reflect that light back to its source, amplified by their own unique praise. There was no spiritual sickness, no creeping apostasy, because the thought of a will separate from the Creator's was a logical and spiritual impossibility. There was no need for faith as we understand it, for the presence of God was not an object of belief, but a constant, self-evident reality. There was no need for hope, for the future was a guaranteed, unending continuation of the present perfection. And there was no need for love as a choice, for love was the very substance of their being, the current that flowed between them and their Maker. The spiritual atmosphere was one of total, blissful, and unquestioning alignment. It was this perfect integrity, this flawless spiritual ecosystem, that would make the first act of rebellion so uniquely devastating. The first crack in this perfect creation did not appear in the foundations of the universe, but in the heart of its most perfect creation. The book of Ezekiel, in its 28th chapter, gives us a stunning biographical portrait of this being, the one we would come to know as Lucifer. It is crucial to understand that he was not created in darkness. He was fashioned as a masterpiece of divine light. The text calls him the Anointed Cherub who covers, a guardian of the very throne of God. He was, in his original state, the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. His form was a dazzling array of precious stones, a living mosaic of the Creator's artistry. He was not just a servant in the divine court, he was its most glorious work, a being of unparalleled rank and breathtaking splendor. He was, as the text states, blameless in his ways from the day he was created. He walked in the fiery heart of God's holiness. He was the chief administrator, the prime minister of the cosmic government. But it was in the very soil of this perfection that a dark and terrible seed began to sprout. It was not a flaw in his design, but a shadow cast by the very brilliance of his own being. He began to look at the glory that flowed through him, and mistook it for a glory that originated from him. The prophet's lament captures the moment of this internal shift. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. The first sin was not an act, but a thought. It was the birth of pride in the heart of perfection itself. The adversary that Lucifer chose to confront was not another celestial being. In his splendor, he had no equal among the created. His enemy was not Michael, not Gabriel, not any other angel who might vie for his position. The opposing force he set himself against was far more fundamental, far more absolute. It was the unchangeable, foundational law of the universe, the law of the throne. This law is simple in its principle, but infinite in its implications. It states that in all of creation, there can only be one source, one center, one ultimate recipient of all glory, worship, and authority. That center is the throne of the uncreated God. This is not an arbitrary rule designed to feed a divine ego. It is the very spiritual physics that holds the cosmos together. Every being, every star, every atom was created to exist in a relationship of dependent orbit around this one central reality. Lucifer, in his burgeoning pride, came to see this law not as the source of his own glory, but as a limitation upon it. Why should all glory flow in only one direction? Why should he, a being of such perfection and wisdom, be merely a reflector of a greater light, rather than a source of light himself? The law of the throne, which had once been the very definition of his honor and purpose, began to feel like an oppressive, cosmic injustice. The opposing force, therefore, was not a person, but a principle. It was the principle that he was a creature, not the creator, and it was this simple, unalterable fact of his own existence that the anointed cherub began to resent. His war was not just an attempt to seize power. It was an attempt to rewrite the most basic law of reality, to establish a second rival center of gravity in a universe that was designed for only one. The internal rebellion in Lucifer's heart finally erupted into a full-blown declaration of cosmic treason. This was not a shouted tantrum in the courts of heaven, but a series of 5 cold, calculated whispers of intent, a manifesto of self-deification that the prophet Isaiah was later given a chilling glimpse into. Each of these 5 "I will" statements was a deliberate strategic step in his plan to establish a rival kingdom. First, "I will ascend into heaven." This was not a plan for physical travel, but a declaration of spiritual and political ambition. It was a vow to climb the hierarchical ladder of the cosmos, to seize a station higher than the one he had been given, perfect as it was. Second, "I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." The stars of God were the other angelic princes, his peers in the divine council. This was a direct declaration of his intent to no longer be a first among equals, but to become their absolute sovereign. Third, "I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." This was his most audacious political move, a claim to the very seat of divine government, the cosmic location where the universal assembly convened. He was attempting to seize control of the legislature of the heavens. Fourth, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds." This was a vow to breach the final boundary, to go beyond the limits of any created being, and to enter the realm of uncreated glory that belonged to God alone. And finally, the ultimate declaration, the one that sealed his fate: "I will be like the Most High." He knew he could not be God, but he believed he could become his equal, a rival power, a second son in a universe designed for only one. This 5-point manifesto was his formal declaration of war. Lucifer's 5-point manifesto was not a prelude to an immediate, impulsive attack. He was a master strategist, and he knew that a war against the throne of heaven could not be won by force alone. It had to be a political and ideological war, a campaign to win the hearts and minds of the celestial host. And so began his wilderness journey, a long and insidious lobbying effort that took place in the unseen corridors and council chambers of the heavens. He did not approach the other angels with a message of open rebellion. That would have been too crude, too easily rejected. Instead, he campaigned on a platform of liberation and self-actualization. He used his unparalleled wisdom and beauty as tools of seduction. To the lower orders, he likely whispered of a rigid and unjust hierarchy that stifled their potential, promising them promotion and greater autonomy in his new merit-based system. To his peers, the other angelic princes, he likely presented a more sophisticated argument. He may have spoken of a new era of co-regency, a universe governed not by a single, absolute monarch, but by a council of enlightened, godlike beings, with himself, of course, as the chairman. His campaign was built on a single, powerful lie. The lie that a creature could find its ultimate fulfillment not in submission to its creator, but in the glorification of itself. The book of Revelation tells us the terrifying result of this heavenly campaign. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. This is not a reference to literal stars, but to the angelic beings. His political maneuvering was successful. He convinced a third of the angelic host to join his mutiny, to transfer their allegiance from the eternal king to the charismatic CEO of a new rival corporation. This was the wilderness journey that forged his army. The political campaign was over. The factions had been formed. The battle lines were drawn, not on a physical field, but in the allegiances of countless celestial hearts. And then a profound and terrible silence fell upon the heavens. It was the calm before the storm, a moment of cosmic tension so thick that the very fabric of reality seemed to hold its breath. On the surface, the rituals of heaven continued. The choirs of the faithful still sang their praises. But their songs were now tinged with a note of sorrowful anticipation. The rivers of light still flowed from the throne, but they flowed through a kingdom that was now divided against itself. The celestial bodies still moved in their appointed courses, but the spiritual atmosphere was no longer one of harmonious unity. It was the heavy, charged quiet of a world on the brink of civil war. Lucifer had consolidated his power. He had his army, his shadow government, his cabinet of rebellious princes. He was now ready to make his final move, to transition from a political rebellion to an open military conflict. And the entire universe, both the loyal and the fallen, paused in a moment of terrifying anticipation. The last chance for peace had passed. The first war, the war that would shatter the original perfection of creation, was now inevitable. Heaven held its breath, waiting for the first blow to fall. The terrible silence was finally shattered, not by a word, but by an act of open, cosmic war. The 12th chapter of the book of Revelation pulls back the curtain on this cataclysmic event, giving us a glimpse into a battle that was fought not with steel and stone, but with the very substance of divine authority and spiritual power. And war broke out in heaven, the text declares, a simple statement for an event of unimaginable violence. On one side stood Michael the archangel, and the heavenly armies who had remained loyal to the throne. Michael's name itself, which means "who is like God," was not just his identity. It was his battle cry, a direct and thunderous refutation of Lucifer's claim to be like the Most High. He did not fight with his own power, but as the divine enforcer of God's unshakable order. His very being was a weapon, forged in perfect, unwavering allegiance. On the other side stood the great dragon, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan and his angels. Lucifer, the light-bearer, had now fully embraced his new identity as the adversary. He fought with the desperate fury of a being who had gambled eternity on a single, prideful throw of the dice. This was the moment his cosmic corporation launched its hostile takeover bid against the throne of the universe. The battle that raged was a conflagration of light and shadow, of truth and deception. It was a war of wills, a clash of authorities. The text does not give us the tactical details of the combat, but the outcome is swift and decisive. The dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Lucifer's rebellion, for all its political cunning and for all the power he had amassed, was utterly crushed. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He had believed that the glory he possessed was his own, but in the final, fiery unveiling, he discovered that the reflected light of a creature, no matter how brilliant, is no match for the uncreated fire of the Creator. The war in heaven was over. The takeover had failed, but the consequences of that failure were about to spill over into a new and vulnerable realm. The roar of celestial battle faded, replaced by a profound and solemn silence. The war was over, the rebellion crushed. But the sentence for this cosmic treason was not annihilation. It was expulsion. The great dragon, the ancient serpent, was seized, and along with the third of the stars who had followed him, he was cast out of heaven. This was not a gentle relocation. It was a violent, gravitational fall from the highest realms of light and order into the lower, unformed dimensions of the physical cosmos. Jesus himself, in the Gospel of Luke, would later give his disciples a glimpse of this moment, stating, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." This was not a slow descent. It was an instantaneous, cataclysmic fall, a being of immense power being hurled through the dimensions at an unimaginable speed. He was stripped of his position as the anointed cherub. His access to the heavenly throne room was permanently revoked. His place was found no more. He was not, however, cast into a void. He was cast down to the earth, and he did not come alone. He brought his entire corporate structure with him, his hierarchy of thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. His kingdom had not been destroyed, it had been relocated. His cosmic trade empire, once headquartered in the heavens, had now set up a new base of operations in a lower realm. And the planet that would one day be prepared for Adam became, in that moment, the occupied territory of a defeated but still immensely powerful fallen king. The silence that followed his expulsion was the silence of a new and terrible reality. The war in heaven had ended, but the war for earth was just beginning. The expulsion of Lucifer and his legions was not a clean, sterile transfer from one dimension to another. It was a cosmic impact event of unimaginable violence, and the primordial earth, in its original perfect state, became the point of impact. The fall like lightning that Jesus described was not just a poetic metaphor for speed and suddenness. It was a description of a catastrophic energy release, a celestial body of immense power striking a physical planet. The first ripples of the war in heaven were a tidal wave of destruction that unmade a world. This is the event that bridges the gap between the perfect world that God created in the beginning and the chaotic, waterlogged wasteland of Genesis 2. The judgment that was enacted upon Lucifer's rebellion was not confined to the spiritual realm. It had a direct and catastrophic physical consequence. The primordial earth, which may have been the very heart of Lucifer's glorious dominion, the jewel in the crown of his cosmic empire, was now shattered. The ancient texts give us clues to the nature of this destruction. The prophet Jeremiah's vision of a world with ruined cities but no man, a sky with no light, and mountains that quaked, is a vision of this very moment. It is the forensic report from the crime scene of a fallen kingdom. The earth became tohu va-bohu, formless and void, as a direct result of this judgment. The planet was thrown off its axis. Its geological stability was shattered, and a great global flood, the flood of Lucifer, not the flood of Noah, submerged the ruins of this fallen civilization under a blanket of darkness and water. The perfect world that the angels had once shouted for joy over was now a silent, watery grave, the tombstone of a failed rebellion. The first act of cosmic history had ended in ruin. The stage was now dark, waiting for a new act and a new actor. With this cosmic history now restored, we can finally return to the opening lines of Genesis and decode them with a new and stunning clarity. The phrase that has been so often misinterpreted as a poetic description of a formless beginning, tohu va-bohu, now reveals itself as a precise, technical term for a post-judgment state. It is the aftermath. Let us be forensic in our analysis. We have established that the war in heaven was a real historical event. We have established that Lucifer and his legions were cast down to the primordial earth. And we have posited that this impact event was the direct cause of the planet's devastation. Now, the language of Genesis 1:2 becomes the primary evidence confirming this sequence. The earth became formless and void. This was not its original state. The darkness that was upon the face of the deep was not the absence of a sun that had not yet been created. It was the darkness of a world whose light had been extinguished, a world shrouded in the shadow of divine judgment. The water that covered the planet was not the raw material for a future creation. It was the flood of judgment, the watery grave of the pre-Adamic world. The Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters is, in this light, not the image of an artist contemplating a blank canvas. It is the image of a divine rescuer, a cosmic lifeguard, surveying a scene of total devastation before beginning the work of reclamation. The first verses of the Bible are not about creation. They are about decreation and the beginning of recreation. The signs were always there in the text. We simply lacked the historical context of the first war in heaven to read them correctly. But the canonical text is not our only witness to this primordial catastrophe. To fully corroborate the link between the war in heaven and the ruined state of the first earth, we must call our forgotten witnesses to the stand, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. While these texts do not describe the fall of Lucifer with the same narrative detail as Isaiah or Revelation, they provide the essential context that makes the entire sequence coherent. Both Enoch and Jubilees speak with unwavering certainty of a primordial, perfect order that existed in the beginning. They describe a universe of perfect harmony, a creation operating on a flawless celestial calendar, and an earth administered by a holy, angelic government. Their entire worldview is predicated on the existence of an original, perfect state that was later corrupted and judged. More importantly, they provide the backstory for the beings who participated in these cosmic conflicts. They give us the organizational structure of the angelic hosts, confirming that a complex and hierarchical society existed in the heavens, a society that was capable of having a civil war. They detail the story of the Watchers, a second angelic rebellion that would later corrupt the Adamic world, proving that the fall of Lucifer was not an isolated incident, but the first act in an ongoing cosmic drama of rebellion. These texts are the missing case files. They are the historical records of the pre-Adamic age that were deemed too dangerous or too complex for the final, streamlined version of the story. They do not contradict the canonical account. They provide its missing chapters. They are the forgotten witnesses who testify that the universe is far older, the conflict far deeper, and the stakes far higher than the simple story of a garden and a serpent would lead us to believe. They confirm that the tohu va-bohu was not a beginning, but the end of a world. With the evidence from the canonical prophets and the testimony of the forgotten witnesses now aligned, the 6 days of creation in Genesis are completely reframed. They are no longer a story of a first creation out of nothing. but the profound and majestic story of a first recreation out of ruin. This is the cosmic thread that connects the devastation of the first world to the hope of the second. Every creative act is now revealed to be a redemptive act. Consider the sequence anew through this lens. The command, "Let there be light," is not the ignition of the first photon in an empty universe. It is the reintroduction of divine light and order into a realm that had been plunged into the darkness of judgment. It is God pushing back the spiritual and physical shadow of a fallen kingdom. The separation of the waters, the raising of the dry land, the forming of the atmosphere. Each act is a strategic reversal of the tohu va-bohu. God is not just making a world, He is healing a broken one. He is taking the shattered, chaotic remnants of the pre-Adamic earth and patiently, methodically, and powerfully reshaping them into a new creation, one capable of sustaining a new kind of life. This understanding transforms the very nature of God as He is revealed in the opening of Genesis. He is not just a distant, all-powerful creator. He is a hands-on, redemptive restorer. He is a God who is not afraid to step into the wreckage, to work with the broken pieces, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of a catastrophe. The 6 days of creation are not just a display of power, they are the ultimate display of grace. It is a story of redemption that begins before the first man ever sinned, a testament to a God whose very nature is to bring order out of chaos and life out of death. This divine pattern, a state of profound moral and spiritual rebellion leading to a direct, cataclysmic and fiery physical judgment, was not a one-time event that ended with the pre-Adamic world. The story of the first war in heaven and the subsequent shattering of the first earth established a legal and spiritual precedent, a recurring pattern that would echo throughout biblical history. The most stark and chilling human-scale reflection of this cosmic event is the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Consider the parallels. The cities of the plain, like the pre-Adamic civilization, had reached a state of total moral corruption. Their rebellion against the divine order was not a quiet, private affair. It was an open, aggressive, and systemic defiance of all that was holy. The outcry against them had, as the scripture says, become great before the Lord. And the judgment that followed was not a slow decay or a natural disaster. It was a direct, supernatural intervention. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. This was not a random volcanic eruption. It was a targeted, celestial strike, a fiery cleansing that left the entire plain a smoking, barren wasteland, a localized, human-scale tohu va-bohu. The story of Sodom is a microcosm of the story of the first world. It demonstrates the same divine principle, that there is a tipping point, a threshold of rebellion beyond which a culture or a civilization cannot pass without triggering a direct, annihilating judgment. The fire that fell on Sodom is a small, historical echo of the cosmic fire and fury that was unleashed in the first war in heaven. It is the recurring pattern that proves the justice of God is consistent both in the celestial realm and on the terrestrial plane. This brings us to one of the most critical questions of our investigation. If the story of the first war in heaven and the subsequent shattering of a pre-Adamic world is so foundational, so critical to understanding the very nature of creation and redemption, why was it buried? Why would the ancient scribes and the later compilers of the canon choose to obscure this truth, leaving only cryptic clues in the prophetic books while exiling the fuller accounts to the wilderness of Apocrypha? The answer, most likely, lies in a deep-seated and perhaps well-intentioned desire to protect a fragile humanity from a truth that was deemed too overwhelming. To begin the sacred narrative with a simple story of a perfect garden and a human choice is to create a manageable, human-scale theology. It places the origin of sin and the responsibility for evil squarely on our shoulders. It is a story that, while tragic, is ultimately contained and comprehensible. But to begin the story with a cosmic civil war, with a third of the angels rebelling, with a primordial planet being shattered by a celestial conflict, that is to begin with a truth of a different order of magnitude. It is to admit that the universe is a far more ancient and dangerous place than we are comfortable imagining. It reveals that evil is not a human invention, but a cosmic power with a history that predates our own. It forces us to confront the fact that we were born onto a battlefield, that the very planet we inhabit is a reclaimed war zone. This is not a comforting bedtime story. It is a terrifying reality. The gatekeepers of the sacred tradition may have made a calculated pastoral decision. They chose to bury the story of the cosmic war in favor of a simpler, more approachable narrative. They were not necessarily trying to deceive, but to protect. But in their effort to shield us from a terrifying truth, they also robbed us of a profound context, leaving us to wonder for millennia why the world we inherited feels so deeply and fundamentally broken. And so, the legacy of this buried war is the world we inhabit today. We do not live on a neutral planet. We live on a haunted one. The earth is not a pristine sanctuary that was corrupted only by the sin of Adam. It is a reclaimed territory, a cosmic battlefield that still bears the spiritual and perhaps even physical scars of that first ancient conflict. The war in heaven did not end with the expulsion of Lucifer, it simply changed location. The prince of the power of the air, as the Apostle Paul calls him, the one who was cast down to the earth, is still here. His defeated but not yet annihilated kingdom is still present. This is the echo of the war that resonates in our present age. We feel it in the systemic, inexplicable evil that seems to erupt in human history. We feel it in the spiritual darkness that clings to certain geographical locations, the desolate places where evil seems to thrive. We feel it in the constant grinding opposition to the purposes of God that seems to be woven into the very fabric of our world system. Our planet is a liberated territory, but it is not yet a pacified one. There are still enemy combatants, spiritual insurgents, operating behind the lines. The war that shattered the first world is the same war that is being fought in the spiritual atmosphere all around us today. To understand this is to be forever cured of a naive, sentimental view of the world. It is to recognize that the chaos, the violence, and the rebellion we see on the news every night are not just the product of human failure. They are the echoes of a war that began in heaven, a war whose final battle has not yet been fought. This ancient cosmic history is not merely a collection of fascinating, forgotten facts. It is a sacred mirror held up to your own life, reflecting a profound truth about your own spiritual identity and purpose. Just like the planet itself, you are not a neutral being. You are, if you are in Christ, a piece of reclaimed territory. You are a soul that was once part of a world system shrouded in the darkness of the fall, a world that was destined for judgment. but through a divine redemptive act, you have been rescued, cleansed, and recreated. Like Adam, you have been placed not in a world of pristine innocence, but in a world that has been restored. You are a citizen of the recreation. And your commission is the same as his was, to be a steward of this new order, to extend the boundaries of the kingdom of God, to bring light into the lingering darkness, and to guard the sanctity of your own heart against the echoes of the old, fallen world. The war that was fought in the heavens is now being fought on the battlefield of your own will. The choice that was before Lucifer, to reflect the glory of the Creator or to generate a glory of his own, is a choice that is before you every single day. The story of the first war in heaven is not just a story about them, it is a story about you. It is a call to recognize that you are living on reclaimed ground and to live a life worthy of the incredible cosmic battle that was fought to win you back. And so, this knowledge brings you right now to a crossroads of choice. To understand the story of the first war in heaven is to understand the two fundamental principles that are forever at war in the universe: the principle of divine order and the principle of rebellious chaos. You cannot be neutral. Every day, every moment, every decision you make is an act of allegiance to one of these two kingdoms. To choose the path of divine order is to consciously align your life with the will of the Creator. It is to submit your own ambitions, your own desires, and your own understanding to His higher purpose. It is to live a life of worship, of service, and of humble trust, believing that His design is perfect, even when you cannot see the full blueprint. It is to be an agent of the recreation, a builder on the foundations that He has laid. To choose the path of chaos is to follow the pattern of the first rebellion. It is to make your own will the center of your universe. It is to live a life of self-exaltation, of pride, of seeking to build your own small kingdom on your own terms. It may feel like freedom, but it is a freedom that inevitably leads back to the same state of ruin and desolation that shattered the first world. You now know the history of these two paths. You have seen their origins and their ultimate destinations. The crossroads is before you. Will you be a citizen of the restored order or a participant in the ongoing chaos? The choice is yours. The excavation of the first war in heaven and the world it shattered has only just begun. What we have uncovered today is a single foundational piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. The ancient scrolls are filled with other records of this cosmic conflict, other dossiers on its key players, and other prophecies of its final, ultimate conclusion. If you are a seeker, a spiritual archaeologist who is no longer content with the simplified, sanitized versions of our sacred history, then this is your invitation to join the expedition. This channel is a community for those who are brave enough to face the terrifying and awesome truths that have been hidden from us for centuries. The war that began before Adam is not over. Its battles are still being fought, its strategies are still unfolding, and its outcome will determine the destiny of all creation. Share what this revelation of a shattered first world has stirred in your own heart in the comments below. Your questions, your insights, and your own discoveries are a vital part of this collective effort to restore the full, uncensored story of our faith. And be ready, for there are other forbidden histories to unseal, other forgotten witnesses to call to the stand. The journey into the deep truths of the cosmos is an ongoing one, and for those who have the courage to walk it, the revelations are only just beginning.